What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stuckey.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast from the Action Network and Fantasy Labs. I'm your host, Chris Raybon, and I am joined by a fellow top 5 most accurate season-long ranker over the last 3 years at Fantasy Pros, my guy Sean Kerner, the director of predictive analytics at Action Network. Sean, how's it going?
What's up? Yeah, I'm still, I'm going to admit, I'm still kind of tilting over the Hall of Fame game, just not finishing. Because the only bet that became official was my first quarter bet on the Bears. But I ended up with like 9 total bets on that game, and I probably would have gone either 8-1 at best or 6-3 at worst if that game just finished. Because I kind of anticipated the game would go 4 quarters. So still kind of tilting over that, but it was just fun to see, live action, have some, sweats going on. But how are you doing?
I'm doing well. And, I actually, some of the books, I did have the Bears. I think we talked about it, like how that line flipped, like 3 or 4 points just because Caleb Williams and the starters got ruled out. So some of the books I bet that it actually paid out. So that was nice. I know all of them didn't. So, that obviously sucks. I get it though. The game wasn't an official score or it wasn't a 4-quarter game. So I could see why they, some books wouldn't, but that was, I'm just glad football's back. And on this episode, we're going to be talking wide receivers, wide receiver twos, the wide receivers in the 13 to 24 ADP range. And, it's going to be a good conversation because we're starting with Deebo Samuel. And I think he's very relevant to what's going on right now as we record this, which is Brandon Aiyuk has permission to negotiate contracts with potential trade partners, which reportedly are the New England Patriots, which they would send Kendrick Bourne back to San Francisco, and the Cleveland Browns, who would do a swap of Amari Cooper, which would be really interesting because it's kind of a one-for-one kind of stud, very good wide receiver swap there. So Deebo Samuel, when I kind of fiddle around with Aiyuk and move him to the Patriots or move him to the Browns, Deebo jumps from my wide receiver 16 to my wide receiver 12. So I guess I was a little lower on him than consensus prior to, this trade, but I would be kind of right in line here. But, how do you think a potential Brandon Aiyuk trade would affect Deebo Samuel?
Yeah, so I was similar to you where, my median projections had him a little bit lower than this ADP at wide receiver 13. But I think when you factor in the potential of Brandon Aiyuk being traded away, which seems more likely than not now, I think
What's your line before we go on? You got to give me a line real quick. Ballpark.
I mean,
odds maker. Give me some odds.
I would say, and you can correct, like you're going to adjust the line significantly here. I would say yes is like minus 180, no plus 150.
About 63%, 65%.
Yeah, more likely than not. But I mean, if he stays in San Francisco, I won't be shocked or anything. But what do you think about that? Would you take the yes or no with those odds?
Minus 180. I would probably go. Yeah. I think it's probably minus 200 or more.
Okay.
Just because, the fact that they've already leaked the terms and the players, and now it's just about him negotiating a contract. I think I just think it's very likely. I don't think all that stuff would have leaked out if they weren't serious about letting him move, and they're trying to signal, hey, we're just trying to get on with it and get this done. So now the ball's in his court. So yeah, I'd probably put it at, I think that's a really good line. I'd probably put it at minus 200,
I was thinking about that. Yeah.
About 2-1. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, or 1 to 2, whatever, however you pronounce it. But yeah. Anyway, back to Deebo. So continue on your medium projection for Deebo.
Well, yeah. I mean, but last year, he finished as the wide receiver 12 overall.
Mm-hmm.
Despite missing 3 games, he was 9th in points per game. And he's obviously going to see a bump whenever McCaffrey, Aiyuk, or Kittle miss time. But all 3 were fairly healthy last year.
Mm-hmm.
McCaffrey and Kittle, they missed week 18 just due to rest. They clinched the 1 seed. But all 3 players that Deebo's competing for were all healthy, and he still finished, top 10 points per game. So, if Aiyuk is traded, I think Deebo easily has top 10 upside. I think if you can get him at wide receiver 13 right now, I would absolutely do it. I think you would rather have the trade be with New England, right? Because they would bring in Kendrick Bourne, way less of a threat for targets than, say, Amari Cooper if they do the trade with the Browns. So I think it does depend which team trades with them. But I think if it's with the Patriots, I think Deebo would easily be inside of my top 10. Whereas if, Amari Cooper comes over, I think, he might go inside my top 12. He might see a slight bump, but Amari Cooper is going to command targets as well. But either way, I think as of right now, I think I can get behind wide receiver 13 because this seems closer to his floor right now.
Yeah, and he was. I don't know if you got a chance to see any of the Netflix receiver show, but Deebo was saying how ever since he had his son, Tyshawn Samuel Jr., he feels like he's just stronger. He has like this dad strength. And I remember there was a game against the my New York Giants last year where, I mean, Deebo, he just wouldn't get tackled. I mean, this guy, he's a running back in a wide receiver's body, and it's crazy to think that he's only had 1 season with more than 60 catches or 892 receiving yards because he's so talented. But, he could do a lot on the ground. And you mentioned it. If Aiyuk gets traded, especially if a guy like Cooper doesn't come back and it's Bourne instead who, is recovering from the ACL, now you're looking at, a potential 1,000-yard season for Deebo Samuel and all those receiving numbers, which, I think that's where he really has that ceiling of, of a top 5 overall receiver when he's putting up his receiving numbers and he can get those runs after the catch. And it's not just, 4 catches a game. It's 5-6 catches a game. That's what you want out of Deebo. So yeah, I like him here too. Wide receiver 14, Nico Collins. This is so interesting because we're going to talk about all these Houston Texans in this episode, and then the next episode we'll talk about one of them as well. But how are you ranking their top 3? Because this is unprecedented. I mean, you had a breakout for Nico, just a ridiculous breakout for Nico in year number 3, and then you had a breakout for Tank Dell as a rookie, and then you go and acquire one of the top 10-ish wide receivers and top 10, 12 wide receivers in the league in Stefon Diggs. And CJ Stroud entering year 2, he's set up, but Nico is going the highest of all 3 of these Texan receivers, coming off 80 catches, 1,297 yards, 8 touchdowns. Are you on board with Nico being the top Texan receiver? Do you think 14 is too high, just about right? What are you doing with Nico here?
It's probably a tad high, and this is all great news for CJ Stroud.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I was high on Nico Collins every year so far. Remember, we were having some margaritas in Santa Monica a couple years ago. I was gushing about Nico Collins.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't really pan out until last year, and I think, honestly, a huge part of that was just simply due to CJ Stroud being a massive upgrade over Davis Mills. But any way you slice it, Nico Collins just had a monster year 3 breakout. He was 11th in best ball points added per game. Now, he did benefit from playing a handful of games without Tank Dell, and I think that goes to your point is when Tank Dell and now, Stefon Diggs are healthy, it's going to just be tougher for Nico to command the same target share as last year. Granted, I think he's for sure in for some monster games again this year, but just may not be as consistent as last year. So this rank feels a little bit closer to his ceiling, which could have been last season. So it's not a knock against his talent. We definitely want to be investing in this offense, but I think getting Diggs, potentially a round later or Tank Dell a few rounds later probably makes the most sense in this situation, just getting the cheapest way to invest in this trio receiver. So I think this is a little bit rich for Nico Collins. I still love him, but wide receiver 14 is a bit rich. I have him closer to wide receiver 18. I think all these receivers in this range are very tight, but I think you're paying a bit of a premium here for Collins just based on, his breakout last season.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. So I went and I checked it out. His targets per route run did come down in the games where Dell was out or missed most of the game. He was at about a 22% target per route run rate in those games, and about 28 or so in the other games. But my wide receiver 14, and to your point, my wide receiver 14 to my wide receiver 18, the 5 guys in there are separated by less than 1/10 of a point. So if you want Nico Collins, be my guest at wide receiver 14. Right. I actually have him wide receiver 14 in my ranks right now. And again, it's everyone's separated by less than 1/10 of a point. So this is one where this whole tier, I'm just going to stock up on guys in it because, we've talked about it. The frozen pond running back tier where things start to get really, really shaky kind of starts early this year, right? I mean, we're not even sure if Kyron Williams is a safe bet as much as we love him because of Blake Corum and just because of, the durability and, and in Jacksonville, they're talking about, giving ETN more breathers and, I mean, everywhere. And then there's a bunch of guys that change teams, which tend to underperform. A bunch of older guys, Derrick Henry's older, Barkley's older. So it's really tough to trust the floors of some of these running backs over a guy like a Nico Collins where, yes, he's competing with 2 other elite receivers, but he's got an elite quarterback. He's playing indoors most of the games. And he's going to benefit from that too, because I'm sure Houston's going to, be pass heavy. And I'm sure that he's going to benefit from the fact that defenses really can't double any one of those guys consistently. Like you're going to have to really kind of pick your poison, with that Houston receiving core. So I don't mind it. I do take your point that, I could easily have him wide receiver 18, 19. All I have to do is, add like a 10th, like a 0.1 yard to his projection. But I think that's important for people to understand that, sometimes, and you do a great job of breaking this down, when you do your tiers and, this is just a tier. This is a big tier. I think that starts, with, early in this, wide receiver 13 range, and it keeps going to probably wide receiver 19, 20, even 21. I mean, I could argue that Diggs is in the same tier as Nico, but we'll talk about him in a bit. Let's go to Mike Evans. I know you like Mike Evans. Right now, in my projections, he is projected for exactly 1,000 receiving yards. I swear I did not do that on purpose. I have a whole algorithm that takes into account his targets per route, his teammates, his quarterback, his age curve and everything. And it somehow came out to exactly 1,000 yards. And the reason I bring that up is because Mike Evans has posted 1,000 or more receiving yards in each of his 10 NFL seasons. Should be a first ballot Hall of Famer at this point. Wide receiver 15, Mike Evans. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so he's my wide receiver 10. But the good, I get it. All these guys are separated by a point. Number 10 through 17 are all separated by like 2 points, But the good news is you don't have to take him at wide receiver 10. You could take him at wide receiver 15. That's typically where he goes. And as you mentioned, I think with him, it's just the reliability at this point, coming off his 10th straight 1,000-yard season. Full disclosure, I'm projecting him for 1,021 yards, so a little bit higher than you. Not much. And a lot of those 1,000-yard seasons, it's fair to point out, occurred when the NFL only played 16 games.
Yep.
So that I think that's very important to point out. The only knock you can have with him is he's entering his age 31 season, which means he's probably likely in his decline phase. But he showed no signs of slowing down last year. He was 7th in best ball points added per game, looked as good as ever. But this is something you might point out. We might see Baker Mayfield drop off with Dave Canales gone. We kind of saw that happen with Geno Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows how much of that is actually due to Dave Canales, but it's worth pointing out. So, I think Evans is fairly safe in this range, and, we'll push wide receiver 1 value if he's healthy, but, he's probably not the most sexy pick just because you kind of know what you're getting with him. Whereas a guy like Nico Collins, I mean, the sky's the limit for him. Deebo Samuel, especially if they trade Barron and Aiyuk. So I wouldn't mind taking those guys ahead of Evans, but if he falls to wide receiver 15 or sometimes past that, which he has in a few of my drafts, I'm absolutely locking in Mike Evans in that range. I just think he does offer some stability and, top 10 upside. So there's not much to really poke at when it comes to Evans, other than just, he probably is going to start declining over the next few seasons. But I don't think that's enough for me to shy away at this range.
Yeah, he's, age 31 is not a massive decline. It's, you should see a little bit of a drop off across the board, but I think he's got, another 1 or 2 at least 1,000-yard seasons in him. I guess the knock for me would be he can be a little volatile at times because he is a big receiver who is going to, get press covered a lot. He's going to go down the field a ton. And so if Baker Mayfield has some slippage, that would be the only thing that would worry me. Like on a week-to-week basis, he might not be as consistent. Remember when Tom Brady started to fall off a couple years ago, different type of quarterback, but remember that year where Evans scored like all his points in one game, essentially. Like
Yeah.
he was having a rough season. So, just beware. I think that's the only thing to beware of with Mike Evans. So he's my wide receiver 17. So we're a little split, but again, all these guys are within 1/10 of a point. I don't really have any qualms with anyone taking Mike Evans at wide receiver 15 or whatever it is. But yeah, for me, he's my 17. And I expect him to put up another 1,000-yard season. Brandon Aiyuk is next up. Now we already kind of spoke about him. New England, Cleveland look like the 2 potential landing spots. New England, he would be more of that true alpha. Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, rookies are in the room along with veteran KJ Osborne, Rager, Thornton, Smith-Schuster, who probably won't make the team, and Demario Douglas, the second-year slot receiver who was the favorite to lead the Patriots in targets. If Aiyuk came, then it would be Aiyuk. But I guess how are you kind of looking at Aiyuk to New England with kind of all the being more of a true target hog, alpha guy, or going to Cleveland where he still would be that number 1 target, but you got your David Njoku, you got Jerry Jeudy, who they like, Elijah Moore, Tillman, just a little bit more substantial weaponry, but the quarterback situation is also kind of shaky in Cleveland, just as it is in New England. So how are you kind of grading Aiyuk, going to each of those 2 spots?
Yeah, well, it's kind of tricky just because this is a moving target because the Steelers are now back in the mix, it seems like. So we can talk about them as well. But I think, man, it's tough. I think between Cleveland and New England, you kind of hit the nail on the head. If he goes to New England, he's going to be the clear number 1 target. He's going to be the clear number 1 target on any of these teams. But New England, it'd be a no doubt kind of thing, he'd have very little competition for targets. But the quarterback situation is very murky where, Brissett will probably start the season and then give way to Drake May at some point. Who knows how Drake May is going to look as a rookie. So there's some volatility there. Probably won't be as efficient. Definitely won't be as efficient as the Niners offense. Probably won't have as much touchdown upside. So I think Cleveland might be the better landing spot. They would have to trade away Amari Cooper for that to be the better landing spot, but he would have to compete with Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku for targets. I think ultimately it would come down to, which version of Deshaun Watson will we see this year? If he makes any kind of leap this year more towards what we saw, in his prime on the Texans, that will be a positive thing. Also, staying put in San Francisco might be his best path for fantasy value. Yeah. They have a lot of mouths to feed. They don't throw much, but it's extremely efficient. And he's the top target technically in that offense. So I think just staying put would probably be the best scenario for him. I think Pittsburgh might be his worst landing spot because he would have to compete with George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth in that offense. So, I think for his fantasy prospects, staying in San Francisco might be the best bet. I think, wide receiver 16, would you take him there right now? Or are there more paths to where you think he might drop outside of, say, your top 20?
Yeah, I don't like him right here at wide receiver 16. Any one of those teams, what I can do in my model is I can just literally change all of those guys' teams and adjust some of the snap percentages and route percentages and get the new projection. And yeah, he drops below the wide receiver 16. And for all three of those teams, I actually think New England is probably the worst for me. So. In my model, I have Cleveland 20th in per game points per game scoring, Pittsburgh 24th, and New England 32nd, dead last. San Francisco I have first. So the touchdown equity is decreasing. And then yards per attempt, I have San Francisco number one in the league by a half yard over every other team. The only team I have projected over 8 yards an attempt, which, some of it is due to him, but also he benefits from just a very efficient offense with Purdy and just all those weapons you have to be mindful of and Shanahan. So he would go from the number one team in yards per attempt to, if he went to New England, he would go to that. They're a bottom 5 team in my model. Cleveland is 27th. And that's because Watson has been at 6.5, and you still expect him to start the most games for them. And then New England is also bottom 5 in yards per attempt. And those will go up a little bit because of Aiyuk, but you're talking about going from the most efficient offense in the National Football League to potentially 2 out of the 3 spots, bottom 5 offenses, and another one where the quarterback has been playing like a bottom 5, bottom 8 quarterback these last couple of years. And he does have some upside. They do have Jameis Winston. I know they do want to pass more and open things up, and they got Jerry Jeudy, and Njoku's playing well and whatnot, but still, it's any way you slice it, I think it would be a downgrade for Brandon Aiyuk. So yeah, I don't like it. I don't like it at wide receiver 16. I think he's more a kind of low and mid-range to low-end wide receiver 2, if he makes these moves. I think Cleveland probably is still the best, because if he's doing a 1-for-1 swap for Cooper, Cooper is still, expected to do decently well in Cleveland. So I think Aiyuk can kind of replicate that to some extent. But I have a lot of questions about, New England, and I have a lot of questions about Pittsburgh as well. I mean, Wilson, they're talking about starting him. I mean, now they're finally giving Fields a chance, but that's that. There's no guarantees there. So yeah, it's rough. I think I'm selling Brandon Aiyuk at wide receiver 16.
Yeah, if anything, his rank might not change much. 3 to 5 slots, but no matter where he goes, it's going to have a big ripple effect on the quarterback, the wide receivers, tight ends on that team, on the Niners, maybe even the running backs. Mm-hmm. So I think, when it comes to Aiyuk going to a team, it's going to have, 8 to 10 fantasy relevant players going up or down based on what team he goes to. So this will be a very significant early August trade. Although it might not be directly tied to Aiyuk's rank. Again, I think that his range of outcomes are pretty narrow because he's going to be the number one option in any of these offenses. But just the impact it's going to have on all these other players, we're going to have to be doing some quick updates, to say the least.
Yeah, I know in my initial update when he for New England, he dropped to I think wide receiver 22, and then he dropped about 5 or 6 spots. I think he's still in like just inside the top 20 if he were to go to Cleveland. And I haven't tested it with Pittsburgh yet, but I would imagine he'd be outside the top 20 for Pittsburgh as well. So.
Yeah, he was wide receiver. Yeah. I was similar to you with these other teams, but he was like wide receiver 24 for me on Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And that would also suck for George Pickens because, I don't think I don't think the coverage being going to Aiyuk is actually that much of a help for a guy like Pickens because the quarterback situation is so shaky and that team wants to run and they play good defense and they play outdoors and they play a lot of cold weather games. So yeah, it's not and by the way, all of these teams are cold weather outdoor teams that he's going to. And remember, he's been playing warm weather San Francisco. Not that he's soft or anything. He's actually one of the best blocking wide receivers in the league. But that's just in terms of the scoring projections.
Right.
You always rather have warm weather, obviously indoor games or warm weather games.
Raybon, when's the last time you've been to San Francisco? It's freezing there. Was it Mark Twain? Mark Twain said the coldest winter I've ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. It's freezing ass cold there all the time.
I mean, I hear you on that. Because like that's why I'm LA. I'm Team LA over Team San Francisco because I do think it's like coming from the East Coast like me, I do think it's a little too similar. But you're still talking about decent weather in the winter versus freezing windy weather in the winter. I still think there, and you're in the NFC West, you're going to LA in the winter. A lot of the time you're going to Arizona. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's not ideal to.
There's always there's always like 2 to 3 games in Cleveland every year where we have to like significantly lower our passing projections because it's 30 plus mile an hour winds with snow. Kind of thing. So I take your point. I just had to bust your balls on.
Oh no, believe me. I actually San Francisco I think was my first solo trip that I ever did. So I just went out there, just walked around everywhere, walked over the bridge and all that stuff. But yeah, I was surprised how chilly it was the first time I went. But I digress. Not ideal if Aiyuk gets traded. Hopefully he stays. With Brock Purdy, who just, averages 9 yards an attempt like it's nothing because that's what he does. DJ Moore, wide receiver 17. I have DJ Moore in the mid-20s. So this is high for me. What about you?
Yeah, no, this is high for me. And, he was solid for the Bears in his debut last season. Was always kind to me whenever I took the over on his props. Feel like he respected the coin. He finished 10th. And best ball points added per game. I think he's going to have a better quarterback situation this year with Caleb Williams, even though he's a rookie.
Yeah.
However, just the target competition this year is going to be insane. Adding, Hall of Famer Keenan Allen to the mix, and then first round pick Rome Odunze, who I think is going to be a stud as soon as this year. It's just going to be tougher for Moore to beat his ADP at wide receiver 17. Certainly, he has the talent to do it, and if Keenan Allen or Odunze were to miss extended time due to injury or something, he would be worth it at this price. But as of now, with everyone healthy, I'm with you. I have Moore ranked, a handful of slots lower. He's my wide receiver 22, and I think that's probably even a bit high. I'm always hesitant to take him there. So yeah, I think wide receiver 17 is just banking on last year's production a bit too much and just not factoring in the target competition with Allen and Odunze this year.
Yeah, he's my wide receiver 24. And he's a wide receiver too. Definitely, I have no issue with that. Yeah. But just because, like you said, that target competition and just, Caleb Williams is a rookie quarterback. I think he's going to be good too, but that's not a guarantee. That's not a given, so the fact that he did, produce very well with Justin Fields is a positive, but he was essentially the lone like alpha in that offense, and now you potentially have 3 alphas. So just a new situation and a lot of uncertainty. Probably a better best ball pick because you can stack him with Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams still goes outside the top 10 quarterbacks, sometimes outside the top 12. And you can kind of try to, build that stack up. But in a redraft league, I do think you're going to have some quieter weeks than you would want for a guy that you would be taking inside the top 20. Jaylen Waddle. This guy is one of the most, I think, talented wide receivers in the league. I mean, Tyreek Hill just kind of overshadows him in Miami, but it's that offense is really built around Tyreek, number one, and then Waddle kind of gets to benefit because he's like a poor man's Tyreek in a lot of ways in that offense. And, defenses are always going to pay attention to Tyreek first. I think the only thing that really hurt Waddle last year was he ended up leaving quite a few games. His average route participation rate was only 75%. The median was 83%, but he had a couple of games in there where he just did not make it through the entire game. Was kind of shuffling in and out. But that's kind of random. That's kind of hard to say that would repeat. So any problems with Waddle at wide receiver 18, which by the way is exactly where I have him ranked.
Same. Yeah, I have him wide receiver 18. He is coming off a down year for him where he finished 32nd in best ball points added per game, only scored 4 touchdowns. But to your point, he did, he was banged up like all season and he left a couple of games. This is a very top heavy passing attack with Tyreek leading the way and then Waddle behind him. But, they did upgrade the wide receiver 3 slot with Odell Beckham. So as long as he's healthy, this is the first time they really have a true number 3 wide receiver and Jonnu Smith at tight end. So we could see the passing attack just a bit more spread out than we're used to seeing when everyone's healthy. But I think this is a fair spot to take Waddle, just banking on him having a bounce back year in terms of health and, touchdowns. He's probably going to score more than 4 this year. So I think this is fair for me. I wouldn't mind taking him here.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess Odell Beckham is better than Braxton Berrios and Cedric Wilson, but
you guess?
He's looking. This is just me, but last year on Baltimore, he was looking pretty jaggy to me. Like, I think the injuries may have taken their toll. Especially that last one, in the Super Bowl, because last year it just seemed like they were trying to conserve him, and you just never really saw it like work out. So yeah. I think we're past that point of Odell being a difference maker, but yeah, he's probably a little bit of an upgrade on what they've had, and that's always good news. But if Jaylen Waddle puts up 1,000 yards in each of the next 7 seasons, he'll catch Mike Evans. He's put up 1,000 in each of his 1,000 plus in each of his first 3,
and he has the extra game to do it.
Yep.
So there should be an asterisk there, to be honest, because. A lot of those were with 16 games. I think we got to, there has to be something, right? Now that there's an extra game when it comes to these records.
I mean, I would say, I'll actually go contrarian and say no. And the reason I'll say no is because if you put it in perspective, we are but ants, tiny little specks in the universe, right? So
true, that is very true.
There was 14 games until 76, 78, one of those years, somewhere in the late 70s. And then it shifted to 16. And that was going on for another about 40 years. But, we're going to be sitting here probably in another 500 years. And do we really want to asterisk every time? You know what I mean? So I'm going to say, records are made to be broken. Let them have it. You know what I mean? Just I'll give them that. Because that's just from our perspective. It's asked, but in reality, we might get an 18-game season soon. So then it's then everything gets all weird anyway. So the point is, he's gotten those 4 figures. But yeah, I like him at wide receiver 18. I think he has some upside in Tyreek Hill, I think, does help. I think, the route participation rate, 75%, as a top 2 wide receiver on a Dolphin team that, like you said, their third wide receiver is Odell Beckham, who can barely stay on the field these days. He could have easily bumped that up to 90%. So there is some room to grow for Jaylen Waddle going forward. Before we go to the last 6 in this wide receiver 2 tier, just a reminder that all of our fantasy content this season is on FantasyLabs.com, not ActionNetwork.com. It has all of our rankings. Remember, both of us top 5 most accurate at Fantasy Pros and season-long rankings over the past 3 seasons. So if you're interested in getting some rankings you can trust, be sure to head over to FantasyLabs.com. We update them daily. It's all downloadable. And also, for all of you DGens out there that want to play some preseason DFS or make some preseason bets or whatever not, Sean, you do a really great job. I had the pleasure of seeing your preseason sheet once. I think you were going to a game and you had me updating some stuff for you. But I mean, you your preseason model is just as intense as your regular season model. So anyone who wants those preseason projections, I don't think anyone's doing preseason accuracy contests, but I would put you at I would give you -200 to win number 1 if there was a contest for those. So everyone be sure to check those out as well. All of the award-winning Action Network fantasy football content and analysis from Kerner and from myself, FantasyLabs.com. And you can get $20 off using the promo code FLEX20 at FantasyLabs.com/flex right now. That's FLEX20 at FantasyLabs.com/flex. $20 off at FantasyLabs.com/flex with promo code FLEX20. All right. Wide receiver 19, Cooper Kupp, is another one. I have him wide receiver 19. I've seen him lower on certain boards. So I'm happy that he's kind of, consensus is finally realizing that I think he's still got it. I know he missed the first month of the season last year and he's getting a little older, but the thing I really like about Cooper Kupp, and you probably know where I'm going with this, but once he came back, almost every game that he played, he was on the field. He ran a route on 100% of Stafford dropbacks. He did that in eight games last year. Did he run a route on every drop? And that's rare. You hardly see receivers doing that in this day and age. But Sean McVay loves to keep his guys on the field, especially his studs. And so when you have a guy running a route on every single dropback, and you have a pretty efficient passer, and you play indoors, and you have another receiver to also draw some coverage, I think good things are going to happen. So I like Cooper Kupp as a top 20 wide receiver yet again. What say you?
Yeah, I'm right in line with you, and he's coming off a down year where he missed the first 4 games of the season with the hamstring injury. He was no longer the top target in this offense. Puka Nacua had his record-breaking rookie season. He really is the number 1 target in this offense. And having said all that, Kupp still managed to finish 21st in best ball points added per game. And, Puka Nacua is week to week right now with a knee injury, meaning his week 1 status is in doubt. Who knows? It could linger in the season. So this certainly feels closer to his floor, but he has more paths to having, a ceiling type of year right now. So love taking him here. And, it's also worth mentioning that Tyler Higbee is also expected to miss, the first handful of games or so. So I don't think any of the tight ends will step up into that full role. So that could mean a few extra targets for Kupp as well. So this definitely feels closer to his floor, which is why I love taking him here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we say, Puka Nacua is that number 1 target, but it could easily flip back around a Kupp this year. They're both so talented that I think it's a situation. I don't think it's a situation where Nacua is more talented than Kupp and he's creating all this extra separation. I think it's just kind of how it kind of worked out last year was that Nakua ended up being more productive. But if you play that season 10,000 times or play this season 10,000 times, I think it'd be a little closer than people think, especially with as many routes as Kupp is running.
Yeah.
Nakua is usually running around about 90% of the time, whereas Kupp is his median route participation rate was 100% last year, which is nuts. So.
Wild. And I would say like he's kind of going in a dead zone in the draft. Like at this point in the draft, you have running backs like Rachaad White, Josh Jacobs. We might consider them the frozen pawn to begin with.
Nah, give me
kind of dicey.
Huh? I don't want those guys. Give me.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And then usually Laporta and Kelsey are off the board by then, so you're kind of in that tier 2 of tight ends. Sometimes the top 4 quarterbacks are taken by now. You might have to decide between like Kupp and Lamar Jackson, but it's kind of a point in the draft where I'm all about wide receivers. So he's just going in a really good part of the draft, and I think this is closer to his floor. So he has a lot of things going for him right now.
Yeah, and we just recorded our experts guide to fantasy podcast over on the Action Network podcast channel. So be sure to check that out. And we talked about taking guys at the top of a tier and how we don't like to take guys at the top of a tier. We like to wait. I will say that this glut of wide receiver 2s, I'm just taking as many as I can in this tier. So I don't care if I'm taking guys at the top, middle, bottom. Like I just want all of these wide receiver 2s pretty much. There's a couple, I think DJ Moore is really the only guy that I think we had significantly lower. But even him, like I'm not upset if I land a DJ Moore. I just don't necessarily want him at wide receiver 17. I think I'd rather wait until I get outside the top 20 at least into the mid 20s. But either way, Cooper Kupp, rock solid pick at wide receiver 19, wide receiver 20. I mean, I don't know how it is interesting how you get to this part of the draft and it's like my ranks match up exactly with all these ADPs, because I got Michael Pittman wide receiver 20, ADP as Michael Pittman wide receiver 20. Nothing to really, no holes to really poke in Pittman's game, because last year he was extremely productive with Gardner, his franchise quarterback getting hurt twice, Gardner Minshew coming in and not really playing all that well, to be completely honest. I mean, he kind of held things together, but what was it, 6.7 yards an attempt? It wasn't great, 7-6 record, but Michael Pittman did his thing once again. The only real change in the offense this year, besides Richardson, is you're adding potentially another, a better receiver than Alec Pierce in Adonai Mitchell, who could command a higher target share than Pierce did. So I guess that's probably the only knock on Pittman. But Pittman's just been so rock solid: 156 targets, 109 catches, 1152 for the yardage last year. Only 4 touchdowns, so he's got room to grow in that area. But any concerns with Michael Pittman, maybe for Mitchell, maybe because of Richardson? Any concerns, or are you fine with Pittman here at number 20?
Yeah, I think there are fair concerns here. I actually have wide receiver 25. Again, 1 point off from wide receiver 20. We're really splitting hairs here. But I said before last season started that if Anthony Richardson were to ever miss time, Pittman would likely get a boost in my weekly ranks. And because, Richardson's a rushing quarterback. He's a raw passer, still is, because Richardson didn't get that many snaps last year. So he still might have, a handful of games he needs to get that experience. And he's kind of an inaccurate passer, willing to run the ball, in the red zone. I think his rushing touchdowns will kind of eat into Pittman's touchdown upside. But like you said, Minshew, didn't play great last year, but I think that just the added volume helped Pittman a bit. And Pittman's like kind of a possession receiver where he does need like a lot of volume to maintain his fantasy value. So, with Richardson or center, I think it's going to hurt that a bit. And, Josh Downs is only going to get better in year 2. I agree. I don't know if A.D. Mitchell is going to overtake Alec Pierce as a rookie, but at least there's a competition there. So I think, Pittman will have some added competition for targets. And I don't, love the fit with Richardson, but he is the rare wide receiver in this range where if the starting quarterback does get hurt, I think his value goes up with Joe Flacco under center. So he's essentially QB proof, which means he has a very high floor in this range. So I'd say that is actually a positive thing. I mean, imagine Joe Flacco running this offense. I think, Pittman would be potentially a high-end wide receiver too. So I think he's a unique wide receiver where no matter who's under center, he's probably going to be wide receiver 2 numbers. So that's why, I don't mind if you do take him here, but my median projections for him are just a bit lower, assuming Richardson does stay healthy this year.
Yeah, I could get to wide receiver 22 with him. Then I have within 0.6 of a point him over the next two guys. So I could go as low as 22, but then I have a little bit of a break. So I couldn't get all the way down to 25 with Pittman. But I just really like this guy. I've always have. I think he's just a good football player. Comes from a football family. His father, Michael Pittman, played. I believe he was a running back for the Bucks. And I just remember watching. I think it was the COVID year, if I'm not mistaken, the year of the pandemic when he was coming out of school. And I just remember geeking out watching his special teams tape. And for a wide receiver that's like not going to play special teams at all once he gets into the league, and that was just such a rare thing. And I was like, yo, this dude is just a good football player. And he really hasn't let me down. And I think he still has room to grow because he hasn't really done it touchdown wise. His career high is 6 scores.
Yeah.
And he's got the body type to do it. So I'm fine with Michael Pittman. I have him wide receiver 20. And I think the interesting thing you mentioned was the quarterback proofness, and this is why I'm not really that worried about Richardson or anything because last year Pittman wide receiver 14. The year before didn't even hit 1,000 yards, ended up wide receiver 22. And that was with the ghost of Matt Ryan, the corpse of Matt Ryan, 3 starts by Sam Ellinger, and 2 starts by Nick Foles, which did not go well either. He averaged 5.3 yards an attempt and had a 10% interception rate. So I think I'm gonna ride it out with Pittman, but I do agree. I think I do have Downs improving this year, and I do have Mitchell commanding, eating into Pierce's workload a little bit and commanding a higher target share. So I have Pittman at 89 catches for 982 with 5.9 touchdowns. So a little bit of touchdown regression, but regression to the mean, regression downward in terms of the catches and the targets, catches, and the yards. But I still have him as my number 20. I
have a fun thought experiment for you. Maybe when you're anybody listening to this, it's irrelevant by now, but you're sitting there at you're sitting there. It's the 20th wide receiver going to get taken off the board. You're sitting there. Brandon Aiyuk, mid-draft. Brandon Aiyuk has been traded to the Browns for Amari Cooper. All 3, Michael Pittman, Brandon Aiyuk, now on the Browns, and Amari Cooper, now on the Niners, are sitting there at wide receiver 20. Which of those 3 are you taking here?
Pittman. I still have him ranked.
Okay.
I already did that math. So
you did.
And listen, Pittman, age 27 is usually the peak age for wide receivers. So, if that touchdown rate is ever going to regress, this might be the year. He could still be getting better. So yeah, I just think this dude's a good football player. I don't ever think he's going to be like a massive bust unless he just misses like half the year due to injury or something like that. So, and he's been relatively durable in his career as well. Yeah. So yeah, I love me some Michael Pittman. No one's gonna convince me that Michael Pittman isn't nasty. So I'm taking him all day. And now we get to talk about Stefon Diggs, and this one is I think it could be polarizing. Wide receiver 21. I actually have him here, but again, 10th, like a 0.6 of a point. He could go to 20, he could go to 22. I think this is the right range for him, but there was some interesting things going on in Buffalo, weeks 1 through 9, 10.6 targets, 7.8 catches per game, 93 yards per game. And then In the second half of the year, he goes from 10.6 targets to 8 targets a game. He goes from 7.8 catches per game to just 4.6. And he goes from 93 yards a game to just 44. And that's not even counting the playoffs when he had that drop that we remember against Kansas City. His yards per route in the first half of the season was 2.45. His yards per route in the second half of the season was 1.38. Mm-hmm. And Buffalo said, hey, you know what? Even though we're squarely in our Super Bowl window, we're going to trade this guy to another AFC contender with a quarterback on a rookie deal. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher that there could be something underlying that maybe we're not aware of. So I guess that's my, like, what are your kind of like intangible thoughts? Like my projection wise, I have him around here. I'm guessing you do too, but like, what do you think is going on with Stefon Diggs?
Oh, I have no idea. But I do have him a little bit higher. Just factoring in the Brandon Aiyuk shakeup will impact someone like Diggs. He's going to move up everyone's ranks, I think, if Aiyuk slips a bit. So, last year he finished 17th in best ball points added per game. But as you mentioned, he really fell off in the second half. From week 10 on, he was 65th in best ball points added per game. And now it could have been injury related or, possibly due to frustration. And that's why his time in Buffalo came to end. That's when they became a very run heavy team. So maybe behind the scenes, he was pissed off about that. That kind of happened in Minnesota, right? Didn't he get pissed that they were?
Oh yeah.
So,
they were going super run heavy with Zimmer was the head coach.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that could have been it, and they said that's it. We want him out of here. So who knows? But in Houston, he has much tougher target competition with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and even Dalton Schultz. So I think just in this offense, though, assuming he's healthy and it wasn't like a injury related thing. There should be enough volume and efficiency with Stroud in our center to make everybody happy, including Diggs. And I think that, like it or not, they're probably going to have to make sure that he's getting targets and happy to prevent some sort of locker room situation behind the scenes. But there's plenty of incentive for him to have a good year because this is a 1-year deal. Could be a free agent next year. So I think we're going to see peak Diggs this year. So I think he has solid value. Anytime he falls outside of the top 20, I think he's offering some solid value. But I have him ranked wide receiver 16. So again, like I remember kind of reading into that last year where like McDermott was asked about Diggs and he didn't have comments. They were being kind of weird about it, being kind of coy. And I think that maybe my guess would be just he was pissed off that they were turning into a run-heavy team, which is something that we've pointed out countless times now. So this has happened before. And then when he left Minnesota, he was, an elite wide receiver once he joined the Bills. So I could see that happening here. But I just think that, his fantasy impact here will put him, squarely in the wide receiver 2 discussion. So again, you're getting him closer to the bottom of this tier, which is why I do like him as value. But I still think he has wide receiver 1 upside in this offense.
Yeah, he absolutely does. It just, I do think, yeah, there was definitely something going on, but CJ Stroud is CJ Stroud is a passer. I think it's fair to say already that he's a better passer than Josh Allen. Obviously Allen gives you a lot with the legs and the creativity, but just as a pure passer, what we saw from Stroud last season, just the efficiency, the anticipation, the arm strength, the ball placement, I think Diggs should be fine. So yeah, I have him right here, but I could easily flip flop him with his teammate Tank Dell, but Tank Dell goes a little later. So I guess if I had to choose, I would take Dell because he's a value for me. But we'll get to that in the next pod because there's a couple other guys in this wide receiver 2 tier. DeVonta Smith, wide receiver 22. Word out of Eagles camp is he's been having just a great camp in Kellen Moore's offense. You and I have talked about the fact that Moore has been top 5 in pace every year that he's been a coordinator. So I think that should help, Eagles offense that, can be a bit run heavy at times, especially in the red zone. So this guy, DeVonta Smith, is only getting better and better. And this is another one of those situations where, the talent gap between him and AJ Brown is it's not really. I know AJ Brown goes wide receiver 6 or 7, and Smith is in the 20s, but the talent gap is probably not as big as people think, if it's there at all. So there's a range of outcomes where I think Smith could outscore Brown. Now I still have Smith, I think, a couple of spots lower than this. I think I have him like wide receiver 26 or so. Again, I'm fine taking guys in this tier. I think this is, you want to load up on, top 30 wide receivers in this draft, because there's only so many there's only like 4 running backs that I think you could feel really confident about, in this draft. And so you want to kind of load up on wide receivers. So I'm not really nitpicking on DeVonta Smith, but what's your outlook for DeVonta this year?
Yeah, no, I love him here. He's my wide receiver 19. Again, he's kind of going in a great spot in the draft to grab wide receivers, whether he's your second or third. Doesn't matter. He was 22nd in best ball points added per game last season, and he's entering year 4 at 25 years of age, entering his prime. So we probably haven't seen his best season yet. As you mentioned, this offense should bounce back with Kellen Moore as the coordinator. I think also having Saquon Barkley in the backfield could open things up, for the passing game. The defenses have to worry about him in the backfield. And it's worth pointing out that A.J. Brown has yet to miss a game for the Eagles in his 2 seasons with them. So Smith would probably be, wide receiver 1 option anytime Brown were to miss time. And we just haven't seen that upside because Brown has stayed healthy. So this rank does seem closer to his floor. Similar to what I thought about Cooper Kupp earlier. So, he does have some unrealized injury upside here. And again, this is just a great spot to be drafting receivers, and he tends to go, a couple slots lower than I think. So love DeVonta Smith if you can get him right here around wide receiver 22.
Yeah, and Smith himself, despite, being known as they call him the Slim Reaper at one point. I know that's KD, but he's only missed 1 game in his career too. Listed at $170, 6 feet, $170. Yep. So he's been durable, but I have no holes to poke in his game. He's one of a bunch of wide receivers in this range that I'm more than happy to take. He finished as the wide receiver 19 last year, finished inside the top 10 in 2022. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 23. I actually have him a little bit higher than this. I think he just had a kind of odd year last year. I think he's better than the numbers he put up last year. I think he's still got a ton of upside. But I, at the same time, I understand why some people might be a little bit, concerned just because, JSN could get better this year. Although I think Lockett will kind of decline a little bit. So it all kind of evens out. But where are you on Metcalf? Because he had a 1,114 yards last year and 8 touchdowns. But I don't know. It just kind of didn't really – it seemed like it was up and down for him last year. It wasn't a great season, even though the numbers looked fine.
Yeah, that's always the case with him, right? Where we know he could do a lot more. So even though he put up solid numbers, he was 19th in best ball points added per game. He did finish the season really strong. He was 9th in best ball points added per game over the final 8 games, but he's still only 26. And just with his physical being and just his upside, we probably still haven't seen his best season yet. So that's why we're kind of always slightly disappointed with him, because we know he's even better. And I love him here. He's in this Diggs, DeVonta Smith, Cooper Kupp. You could even throw a Michael Pittman tier for me, where this is just a great time to take receiver, where if you get an elite running back early on or take one of the top 2 tight ends, you can still get a legit, high-end wide receiver 2 in these guys in the 4th, sometimes 5th round. So this is just a great, tier of receivers to target. But I think when it comes to Metcalf, the only slight concern would be, I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to have a year 2 breakout. He's certainly going to command more targets this year. But I think they're more likely to come at the expense of Tyler Lockett than Metcalf specifically. So that doesn't worry me too much. But I just think that based on his ADP, wide receiver 23, again, that feels closer to his floor, and he does have wide receiver 1 upside. So I just love taking these receivers that fall in this range, just based on where they're ranked and just kind of how the flow of the draft goes. When people are kind of attacking these running backs that I think have more red flags than people realize. I think this is just a great range to take all these wide receivers that kind of fall to this like lower end wide receiver 2 tier.
Yeah, and maybe the one other thing we should mention about the Seahawks, Ryan Grubb is the new offensive coordinator. Shane Waldron goes to Chicago, so there is some newness, but that might help. I think it got a little bit stale in Seattle last year, but this guy Metcalf, I mean, you mentioned the physical traits. He's so big and strong. I think he's always a threat to lead the league in touchdown catches.
Yeah,
and because he could just run away from people, like he always is a threat. I think to lead the league in receiving yardage too. And he only had 112 targets last year. No, it was not 112. It was what was it? Hold on. I was looking at DeVonta. 119. Yeah, 119. So only 66 catches. So him and Geno Smith kind of struggled to get on the same page. But the year before, 64% catch rate. So this guy, and last year, 16.9 yards a catch. So I mean, if you could get that catch rate up, he had 90 catches in 2022. You put 90 catches at 17 yards a catch, and I mean, you're squarely in business. And I think that's 1,500 yards right there. So
yep.
That's kind of his ceiling, and it might not even be his ceiling. So yeah, I have no issues with taking DK. And then I have no issues with taking Smith and Jigba later in the draft. I think Lockett is going to kind of gracefully decline. Like I don't think he's going to be like a total non-factor or anything. But, I think he's going to kind of gradually taper off a little bit at this point in his career. And then last up, Malik Nabers of the New York Giants, rookie LSU product. If you watched Hard Knocks offseason on Max, you saw Joe Shane and the team's thought process on Nabers. They really felt like they needed a number one receiver. They really feel like he's their guy. And, that was kind of along with Brian Burns, really the prize of their offseason. So, he's going to be put in position to succeed. But I do think it's interesting that, Nabers is going – on a team quarterback by Daniel Jones and or Drew Lock, with no track record, it's interesting that he's going, this high. It kind of makes me a little bit uneasy, but maybe that's just my, pessimistic Giants fandom speaking. But I do feel like there are some other wide receivers with higher floors that I would be a little bit more comfortable with taking. So what are you doing with Nabers, wide receiver 24?
Yeah, no, I share your concerns with just the quarterback play here, but I think just based on talent, he is absolutely worth this draft slot. I think he's already polished. He's already a well-rounded, polished wide receiver as a rookie. He's making play after play in camp. Reminds me a lot of Jamar Chase. And he should be the clear number one target in this offense, without a doubt. But, unfortunately, Daniel Jones is the quarterback. So you definitely need Jones to step it up this year. This does seem high for a rookie wide receiver, I'll admit it, but I think just based on his potential, his talent, it does make sense. But I'm wide receiver 24, but there is some concern with just his year one production based on Daniel Jones. So I think that when it comes to these guys like DK Metcalf, Cooper Kupp, DeVonta Smith, I want to be loading up on those guys. And then by the time Nabers is on the board, I'm maybe attacking running back. So he just doesn't fit my draft strategy just based on the way things are shaking out. But he's a guy that I can't fault you for taking him this high. The talent's there. He could have a Jamar Chase-like rookie season. He just doesn't have Joe Burrow as his quarterback. So I think this is a fair price for him. You definitely want to shoot for upside in fantasy, especially when you get to the lower end of wide receiver 2 tiers. But I'm right there with him, wide receiver 24.
Yeah, I'm at 27 with a half a tenth a point separating the 27 and 31. So like the guys in that range for me, Nabers, Pickens, Cooper, Kirk, and Keenan Allen. I think all of those guys have question marks, so I get it. I don't mind him there, but I definitely I do think he's a better best ball pick, because I do think there might be some volatility early on, just because of this offense and Daniel Jones and the question marks and whatnot. So this is the part of the draft where hopefully I've already got 3 stud receivers. Like that's the ideal. So this is where I can start, opening things up a little bit more. And I don't feel like I have to take one of these guys, because I think this is where, don't get me wrong, all these guys have, massive ceilings. And I think, if you still need like your third receiver, I wouldn't hesitate to take, a Nabers or Pickens or Cooper or Kirk or Allen, even any of those guys. And then you get to Jayden Reed, and that's when it's like, okay, well, now we're getting into, like, I love Jayden Reed, but he was a guy that, ran around on like 65% of dropbacks. Is that going to increase? There's like 4 receivers there. So I think that's probably, like, I could easily put Nabers, like, number 32 even. And I wouldn't, like, I have him 27, but I could lower him a tenth of a point. He's 32. And that, we've been talking all, like, these receivers are so close because they're all just getting, there's about 30 guys that are going to get, you can really bank on their target share and their snap rates. And so after you, like, hit Keenan, like in my ranks anyway, after you hit Keenan Allen, I keep talking about these tenths of a point, but Keenan Allen to Jayden Reed, I have almost a full point separating those guys. So that's kind of my drop off. Is right in this range. So this is where I'm starting to say, oh, I might need a running back. Let me see
Exactly.
see who's there. So that's just my draft strategy. I think in redraft it tends to work the best when you're loading up on receivers early and then kind of addressing running back, kind of a 0 RB strategy. Late round quarterback, try to get a stud tight end as well. In best ball, you're trying to get a diversity of builds and build different stacks and do different things, I think. So you definitely want exposure to Nabers, and that probably kind of explains some of why the ADP is so high, because we are using best ball 10 ADP over the past 2 weeks. So that's kind of what I'm thinking on Nabers. But yeah, I do think there are some risks with Nabers. So this is kind of where I'm starting to veer a little and saying, I don't just want every wide receiver.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So just to recap, I think you were, I know you were a little lower on DJ Moore and a lot higher on Mike Evans. Anybody else in this range that we talked about that you're higher or lower on? What you want to mention?
Yeah, I just think, like Evans, like in the 3rd round, I think makes sense. But I really love the cluster of DK Metcalf, Stefon Diggs, and DeVonta Smith. Usually you can get them at like the end of round 4. I think that's like the sweet spot when it comes to wide receiver and my draft strategy. You probably need a top 6 pick to really take advantage of that. But like you said, I think once you get to like Nabers at 24, it opens up where, there's 6 or 7 receivers I can make a case for taking at 24. But I think that cluster of like DK Metcalf, Stefon Diggs, and DeVonta Smith, and Cooper Kupp, I love getting one of those guys in round 4. That's been part of my overall draft strategy this year.
Yeah, and if you're in a league that starts 3 wide receivers and a flex, if I don't mind going 4 straight wide receivers in the first 4 rounds, or if I'm in a league with 2 wide receivers and a flex, 3 stud wide receivers and try to get a stud tight end in there somewhere as well. I don't mind that at all. I don't mind the 0 RB strategy. Where I'm starting to get exposure to earlier running backs is when in best ball to try to get different builds and just kind of some different team construction. But in redraft, I'm fine if I don't get a McCaffrey or I'll take Brees, I'll take Bijan, and I'll take Taylor, but after that, it gets really kind of frozen pondy very quickly for me.
Have you ever had a team where it's like the one weakness on your team is wide receiver? It's a hole you can't get out of.
Yeah.
Like, what are you gonna do? You're trolling the waiver wire for like Robbie Anderson or something. It's just the
Chosen,
worst.
Robbie Chosen. Get it right.
Yeah, Robbie, even worse. Robbie Chosen.
Number
Yeah,
3,
like,
not Chosen 1, Chosen 3.
or Chosen Anderson, whichever one. But it's like you are in such a hole. Whereas running back, you can strike gold and land a guy that ends up being a top 10 running back. That's not really possible, or it's way tougher with receivers. So I just think it's so critical to have 3 really good wide receivers before you get to round, say, 5 or 6. Like, it's critical.
Yeah, and another reason why I did a piece, it's up on Fantasy Labs, where I looked at the last decade of running backs that changed teams, because there's been about an average of 4 to 5 per year that changed teams. This year, about 40% of the top 36 running backs have changed teams.
Oh, wow.
And, like, I think we had just like 11 running backs over the past decade, so like 1 per year, that were going as a top 12 running back that were on a new team. This year we have like 3 or 4. Like, it's just unprecedented. And those guys, they have performed worse than ADP in every measure possible. Like, if you just look at straight up, value versus ADP, value versus expected, there's only been 1 top 5 finish for running backs that have changed teams over the past decade. Like, it just upside, floors, everything.
Right.
So like there's probably even unrealized downside with a lot of these running backs that we're not even like, because like, I'm like, say, Derrick Henry to the Ravens, that sounds great, but it's like,
well, I think that's
30.
the one. That's
like,
the one that I think might still work out. But
exactly, we think it might, but that's what I'm saying. Like, we might, if we just take wide receivers instead, we'll probably be better off.
Well, Zach Moss, it's only early August, and the ice is not only cracked around him,
Woo!
It looks like he's fallen in to the frozen pond. Same with like Austin Eckler. But I agree, like all of these like running backs that change teams that are kind of inside the top 30, we're already seeing some of them facing that adversity that you don't want to be dealing with if you take them in the first 7 rounds. Whereas, wide receiver, you don't really have that as an issue this early in the draft.
And the great thing about the frozen pond tier is, in ADP this year, is that if you hammer wide receiver early, you could just swim on over to an icy Tyjae Spears who's in the frozen pond tier, but like he's the opposite of, like, you know what I mean? Like you get your Brian Robinson, or you get your, you know what I mean? Like, just get the Chase Brown then. Like, take that part of the frozen pond.
Yeah, they're the fish underneath the surface that we're fishing, and you pull them up, and like, they're even more valuable. Right, I agree. That's my approach. Rounds like 8 through 12, we're taking those high upside, backup, quote unquote, running backs.
Yeah, I want quality at wide receiver and tight end, quantity at running back, and then there's you can wait on quarterback, unless in best ball that's the only time I'm taking quarterbacks early, because I want to have Lamar teams, I want to have Mahomes teams, I want to have Josh Allen teams, exactly. So even though the only annoying thing about that is not only do you have to reach for those guys, but you also, in best ball, you're trying to stack, and because they're running quarterback, you're like paying a premium for the quarterback, but you don't want their rushing upside because you want them to like hit the stack and get all that value that way. So it's tough with those guys, but you can't go wrong. Bottom line, you can't go wrong with just hammering these wide receivers. Pretty much almost all of the guys we mentioned we liked. There's only a couple of them that I think we were lower on, and that was DJ Moore, which it's still he's going 17 in some spots. We have him in the mid 20s, I think. So not even like, I'm not upset if I get a DJ Moore. And then Nabers is kind of where it starts to fall off.
Well, and Aiyuk at wide receiver 16.
Aiyuk is just in limbo.
Maybe live drafts he's going wide receiver 20 or something.
Yeah. This ADP varies by site, obviously. This is just one source, and you always want to check the site you're drafting at, and remember, it's average draft position. So everything could switch, but that's why we mentioned our projections, and okay, this guy's only a 1/10 of a point behind this guy, and so that you can realize that it's really about hammering this wide receiver 2 tier, and not just like trying to pick guys up, pick your spots. Like, almost all of these guys should be plus EV draft picks. That's going to do it for our Fantasy Flex wide receiver 2 pod. We will drop our part 3, where we'll go wide receiver 25 through 36 and 37 to 48, and guys outside the top 48 that we like on our next episode. So be on the lookout for that. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, Fantasy Flex, wherever you get your podcast, so you do not miss an episode. Also, don't forget FantasyLabs.com. That's where all of our fantasy rankings, tools, content is this year. You can find Sean on X at @_oddsmaker. I'm at Chris Raybon, and we're at those same handles on the free award-winning Action Network app. If you want to get into some degenerate preseason betting, futures, we're going to start dropping futures and our futures picks on there as well. So be sure to download the free award-winning Action Network app, and you can follow Sean at @_oddsmaker. I'm at Chris Raybon. Until next time, let's get this money.